right, in today's session, we're going to be going over ingredients for better advertising design. And so this isn't going to be hard rules that you necessarily have to follow, because at Pirate Media One, more often than not, you're working with businesses and mom and pop shops who don't have an in-house design assistant. So of course, the old adage of the customer is always right is going to be at play here, but there are some things I want you to remember and consider when approaching advertising assignments successfully. The very first thing that you're going to want to do is get to know your media kit. Although this tool is mainly for account executives and advertising staff, it's helpful for understanding our offerings in advertising. When assigned to design an advertisement, make sure you're cross-referencing the dimensions in the media kit. Very rarely do we allow advertisers to request custom sizing, so if an account executive has requested a size from you that doesn't make sense and isn't included in the kit, be sure to seek clarification before proceeding. So we're just going to take a look at that kit really quick. Just to expand, there's quite a bit of information in here, but most of the pages that you as a designer are going to live on are going to be the ones where you see these kind of boxes where we've got the numbers and then the dimensions. So let's say you're tasked with designing an ad for our website. These are the only dimensions we offer. If you're also trying to double check and make sure that you've set them up accordingly in a width by height format, you can check and make sure that the orientation matches what you're seeing on your InDesign or Illustrator screen by looking at these examples over here, and the numbers on each ad correspond with the numbers over here in the chart. So that's how you can double check and just make sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to before you begin designing. And that is available for a majority of our publications in here. You'll see the dimensions for our newspaper ads, and then of course those examples of what those sizes would look like. We don't have examples of what the sizes would look like here, but at this point you know that we're doing width by height. And so in this case you can just reference these sizes if you're working on a housing guide ad or a Techo Echo newsletter ad. Those are all going to be available in here for you. And that goes for any of our publications that we offer. So just kind of get familiar with the media kit, know what's included in here, but by and large, it's going to be your resource for sizing opportunities. The next thing that you're going to want to get to know is Trello. While we do produce some ads for clients in-house, a lot of our advertising does come in camera ready. Trello is the main project system used at Pirate Media One. You may have already used it for magazine design, but as a designer, you are going to most frequently use it in relation to advertising, design request, and then of course magazine production, like I just mentioned. We are going to review the design request function today and the ad selection function. For design requests, the only thing that I would like to add is just be sure your ad rep has attached a creative services design request form to their request, so that way you know that all the information that you need is being provided. If you don't already have access to the board, let your production manager or the creative director know and they can share it with you. But this is an example of what the design request board looks like. So you can see over here that our ad reps have templates either for a Pirate Media One marketing material or ad design, or a description for business cards. We're going to be looking at ad design today. In this case, we had a request for a WZMB tryouts ad. You can see that all of the information needed for the designer has been provided in here. It's a house ad. We've got the dimensions, whether or not they need it in color, black and white, a headline, the body copy, what needs to be included on the ad, as well as additional footer information and information about logos to include. If they need more than one size with the same content, they'll fill this out again accordingly. And you can see we have attached references to old advertisements here for the same topic, as well as logos that need to be included in the ad. And so with this example, I'm actually the one that put in the request. So I gave information to the creative director and the production manager, and then gave them the opportunity to assign it out. And then they gave it to Parker, and Parker was able to begin working on it and then provide that updated version here. And so we can see that on this card in the needs approval section. So once it hits needs approval, it's going to be up to the ad rep and the advertising advisor to look over it, share it with the client, and make sure that it's good to go. They will let you know in the comments here if there's anything that needs to be added or changed to the final ad. But otherwise, once it's done, it can be moved to final and closed out by the production manager or creative director. But it's a pretty easy process. If you get one of these design request forms and there's nothing in the description or you're missing information, don't be afraid to ask, because they need to be providing that to you in order to get the best possible ad. So don't let them just assume that you're going to come up with the copy and the headline and everything for them. The other board to look at is going to be Spring 23 publication ads. So if ever you need something for the magazines or your newspaper section, the production manager should have already dropped those, but you can see it's in order by date according to the newspaper going this way. We also have magazine publications towards the front here and special editions that you can find. But if I scroll through and I'm looking at the first paper of the spring semester, we'll see that we already have these lined up, and this is where our production manager goes to just grab these ads. And also, if you are designing an ad, this is where it will eventually get moved, so that way the production manager can grab them for the actual publication. So this is just a overview of our Trello functions for ad purposes. The next thing you're going to want to get to know is going to be your ad rep. So at Pirate Media One, generally the advertising representative is the middle person between the client and the designer. They're often tasked with relaying information from the client to the designer, so if something isn't making sense, clarify it with your advertising rep. It's not to say that you can't make direct contact with a client, but generally you're also going to be working just in tandem with that ad rep. If you don't have what you need to complete an ad, or you're not given ample time to turn around a design, definitely communicate your needs to your representative or to the advertising and marketing advisor, and they can help you. Although there are certainly things that a designer can source on their own, like if the ad rep didn't provide a phone number or an address for the business or what have you, regardless, we want to make sure that we're keeping consistent communication with the person who requested the ad. Next thing you're going to want to do is get to know your client, so do take some time and do your research. Majority of businesses have some kind of social media presence. Even if their branding isn't as cohesive or as established as chains, take notes about what you notice and any recurring themes in their current online presence. This is going to help you produce an ad that works with their existing aesthetic, whether or not they have something fully established or not. By doing your research, you're increasing the odds that your client will actually enjoy and approve of the ad firsthand. Remember that while you do have some creative freedom with advertising design, it's ultimately not about you and your wants. So we might spend this whole session talking about standard rules and concepts to follow with advertising design, but if a client is adamant about including a low quality photo and Comic Sans as their font choice, then we must oblige. It is their money after all. However, that doesn't mean you can't make professional suggestions, especially if these unsavory requests are presented to you up front. So like I said, with the low quality photo, sometimes it just is a matter of showing them what it looks like on the ad size and saying, okay, here's the image you've provided. You can tell it's a little bit pixelated. Is there anything else that you've got that's a bit higher quality or larger that we can use? I just want to make sure you're aware of how this could show up in the print ad. So it's okay to show them sometimes what they're asking for, especially if they're adamant. A lot of people are visual creatures and they just need to see it to know that it's not going to work. Otherwise, they're going to be convinced that they're right and that this low quality photo will work. So sometimes it just is a matter of showing them, hey, here's what you're asking for. I just want to be sure that you know that it's looking a little low quality, and of course in a professional tone. Going off of getting to know your client and the product, I do like to talk about David Ogilvy. He's known as the father of modern advertising. And so with him, he heavily researched every product he advertised, and many of his ads found inspiration from one or two small facts that others would overlook. But a lot of times these small facts form the base of some of his biggest successes including Dove, Rolls-Royce, Shell campaigns. So it does pay off to really be a researcher. Now, of course, David Ogilvy was a mixture of different roles, and we're talking a lot more about the design aspect, more so than the copy writing aspect and things like that. But that just goes to show, at the end of the day, research is your friend. I know it sounds like a pain in the butt, and research doesn't always sound glamorous, but in any design job that you do, you need to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to look into the client and look into what they offer, what they're about. And heck, even if you have time, and it's that kind of establishment where you can pop by and just kind of look around their shop, that's an option too, just to give you the best possible playing field. But otherwise, we do have the luxury, like I said, of online presence these days to refer to. When you are thinking about the design, do understand the intended audience. So the customer is not a moron. She's your wife. That is a quote by David Ogilvy. And I want you to kind of think for a second what Ogilvy might have meant by that. And I'm just going to give a couple of seconds. And basically, going off of that, it's just reflecting that, you know, your viewers are not stupid. Treat them with respect, and they've got, at the very least, basic intelligence levels. We shouldn't have to cram so many things into the ad in order for it to make sense to the audience. And that's one way that you as a designer can also work with your ad rep to make sure that your client is making the best possible use of their space. And sometimes you've got people out there that think making the best possible use of their money and space is by filling every inch of it, when that isn't necessarily the case. College students specifically is the audience of our products. So this is who the advertisers are trying to reach, and we should produce and design advertising that speaks to college students. And on that note, y'all have a benefit in that regard that you are college students. Not every agency that you work at are you always going to be designing for an audience that fits your own demographic. But in this case, you know exactly what college students would respond to, at least somewhat. And so do feel encouraged to share that professional opinion, because you are going to be able to help your client by saying, okay, as a college student, here's what would reach me, or here's the kind of design that would speak to me. So don't have this like imposter syndrome of, oh, I've never done ads before, or things like that. Certainly, you know, it's okay to feel that way, but just know that you do have a leg up on really understanding that audience and being able to use that as an expertise with your client. Just going into the fundamentals of advertising design, and it's not saying that the ad has to look like the one over to the right, it's just understanding the basic layout and essentially just keeping in mind those basic things that you want to make sure you're including. So in this case, the hierarchy is visual, caption, headline, copy, and signature. It's pretty similar, photo, cut line, headline, text. While advertising design used to take on a similar appearance to basic news and editorial design, what we're looking at here, we are not trying to design ads much like this anymore. I want you to view this more as a guide for hierarchy. So visuals should always be the biggest thing on your ad, whether that takes up the whole lot of what they've purchased or if that just takes up majority of it, like this example here, should be the biggest thing speaking to your reader, and that is because images usually are what catches people's attention and sells. Most readers are going to look at that photograph first. If you put it in the middle of the page, here's the quote, the reader will start by looking in the middle, and then her eye must go up to read the headline. This doesn't work because people have a habit of scanning downwards. However, suppose a few readers do read the headline after seeing the photograph below it. After that, you're requiring them to jump down past the photograph, which they have already seen. So it's not likely that you're going to keep your readers in that format. So just keep in mind your visual should be the biggest thing when you're starting out on an ad. They used to include captions unless you've got some kind of needing to credit whoever took the photo. I would say this isn't so much as necessary anymore, so we are going to jump down to the headline. Headline is going to be one of the most important things, and they should be short, catchy, to the point in order to capture your reader's attention. Readers do not want long, lengthy headlines. Copy, there's quite a bit of copy on this example ad here. I would say for college students, you're probably looking at 1 to 3 sentences max of what they might be willing to continue to read. Of course, you're going to have clients who ask for more, but if it's getting really lengthy and long and it's not bulleted, again, this might be an opportunity for you as a designer and the ad rep to speak to the client and let them know, hey, is there a way we can cut this down a little bit, or even make suggestions on the most important part of the copy. The next thing that you have on the advertising layout is going to be your signature. And so this is going to include your logo, any contact information for the business, social media, but you'll see that basically hierarchy-wise it's going to be placed towards the bottom of the ad, not necessarily towards the top. And again, that is a means of kind of providing an incentive to get people to the bottom of the ad, because you're providing information that they may need if they want to go to this business. And so additionally, just to add to that, the official logo and things like that should be provided by your ad rep. So do make sure that you have that before you start on a design, because we do want to provide our readers with an official logo. This is an example of a contemporary and local ad where they utilize the Ogilvy layout. So you can see we've got that dominant image up there, followed by a headline, and then we've got quite a bit of body text going on there, but all in all it does provide some valuable information to students who are going through Greenville Utilities. And then of course we have the signature over here to the right with that logo, their web address, phone number, and PO box. And then of course they let you know that they're on social media, but not necessarily where exactly on social media. So that's one thing I would add, is if they've got some kind of tag on social media accounts, to have that included as well. But otherwise, at least students have those icons to know that they can find Greenville Utilities on those platforms listed below. This is an example of the importance of photos in your design. So you'll see that this photo, even on a web ad, is going to be the first thing to catch my attention, and then it honestly continues to pull me down in the ad to where I'm reading the rest of it. It's not exactly likely that you're going to read this small text above it, so I do think it speaks to Ogilvy's theory that image placement is important, and the content of an image is also important as far as capturing attention and how it continues to pull people's attention downward to read the rest of the ad. So again, we do have this as backup just to kind of help explain part of this ad, but it's not necessarily a fact that your viewer is going to read it. But I did think this was just a good option to show that whether you're in print or online, that image hierarchy is important in catching your attention. And so where it's placed is where your eyes are automatically going to go first. There are a couple of details that you'll need to gather, presumably again in tandem with your advertising rep. So in this case, it's going to be your photos/art, just like with print design. Again, they should be the most dominant piece on the ad. Sometimes a headline may fulfill this role, and I'll have some examples of that on the next slide, especially if they're clever. But if you do have art, give it room to speak, especially if it's really good art. If it, again, is a client who's provided you with low quality art and it's just not really doing the job, then that might be an instance where you would play it lower than you might with a really good piece of imagery provided. Going back to that headline, on average, 5 times as many people read the headline as they read the body copy. So when you have written your headline, essentially the client has spent 80 cents out of their dollar. So essentially, again, 80% of the money that they're spending on that ad is going into that headline, and if the headline sucks, they've probably wasted their money, because it is going to lose readers right after that photo already got them. You get them to the headline, it's boring or doesn't make sense, then your reader is gone, and it's not likely they're going to stick around to read that body copy. So again, while the ad rep should also be working with the client on body copy and headlines, that's also a space sometimes where designers, if you have ideas, can offer some suggestions, because that is the important part of helping to develop a successful advertisement. Lastly, again, that body text, just keep it simple. Some ads can even go entirely without body text, but I'm going to be honest, this isn't usually the case with local advertisers. Sometimes there is just a little bit of explanation that's needed or additional detail for students. But of course, there are some that could get away with it, like Sup Dogs is a big enough name in town that if they just advertised with a big image of a hot dog and a catchy headline, they probably wouldn't need body text, and you could jump right ahead to their logo at the bottom and just their location. These are just a couple of examples of ads that either prioritize the headline as the main art or catch, or in the case of the last one, didn't even need body text to go with it. So with this one on the left is a local ad for Carolina Pregnancy Center that they used to run all the time in the newspaper. And I actually love this ad because when you think about it, a pregnancy center ad is not necessarily something that to me is going to be catching your average college student's eye. It's not to say that there aren't college students that get pregnant and need the services here. In fact, that does happen, which is why they advertised in our publication. But again, it's not necessarily something that right off the bat, if I just saw Carolina Pregnancy Center as the ad, that I'm going to stop and read. However, they had a catchy headline to go with their ad, which was meant with the intent of catching college students' attention. So their headline was, "You drank, period. You danced, period. You had sex." And then they've got a circle around here and it says missing something, question mark. So missing your period. They're letting you know that they offer free on-site pregnancy testing, which again is something that could definitely very well be important to a college student. But without that headline, I may not necessarily have stopped in the paper to check this out. The second one's a little bit goofy and longer than your usual headline, but I like to include it because it does show it's okay to play around and experiment, especially if you're trying to kind of guess how to get attention from your readers. But it just says, idea, make an ad so dumb people will actually want to look at the bottom to see who the heck paid for this shit. And that's it. That's the whole ad. They bought pretty standard size and they didn't chop it full of stuff, but we get the point. It's about this little lemonade alcoholic drink. I have the logo and that may be all I need. So it's okay sometimes to play around with creative concepts or have goofy little headlines to catch people's attention because it helps break up the stuffier other headlines that might come in that aren't catching readers' attention. And like I said before, some businesses are so well established that they do not need body text to say who they are or what they offer, in this case of Guinness. All right, this is an ad that I like to show students, kind of going back to understanding your audience, not making them have to guess what the point is, looking at this ad without reading the text above. You probably wouldn't guess right off the bat that this ad is about auto loans. If you go and read the body text, let's say your reader has made it that far, we've got to kind of jump through some loops to get to the whole point of what this stake even has to do with auto loans. So not a great example of making things obvious for your reader. Again, it's okay to have fun with it, but this ad is one that I pulled from ads that weren't necessarily well received and didn't really speak to the whole point of why we were even offering this ad. Because again, you're doing a lot of assumption that people are even going to read the body text these days. Although that is a good looking stake. So at the very least, their imagery and attempt to try something out of the status quo can definitely be worth the experiment sometimes, but it just may not always pay off. Another example here of ads that kind of make readers jump through the point. If I had covered this logo down here, a lot of times when I give this session in person, students tell me right off the bat that they would have never guessed from first glance that this is a Coca-Cola ad or exactly what this has to do with wanting me to drink Coca-Cola. Now, I'm sure if you went through the process of reading the whole ad, you might get the full picture. But again, this ad makes a lot of assumptions that people want to stick around and read an advertisement all the way through. So again, getting straight to the point, especially with our audiences these days and the attention spans that we hold, is going to be more to the benefit of the advertiser for a successful ad in the long run. This is another example of an ad that kind of takes the long route to get to the point. However, they work up front saying this is a mortgage ad, and then they go through and talk about how to play dominoes. And I do think it's kind of a cute approach. They say at the very end, once you get through how to play dominoes, it just says, worry less about your mortgage and more about your free time. Mortgage is made easy. That's pretty cute. Again, though, this was one of the ones that was a ad considered not well received because people weren't willing to read through all of this, or they were just scanning very quickly to get to the point of the ad. So again, not to discourage you from trying some quirky stuff, but just letting you know, sometimes experiments aren't as well received and sometimes they are. So just like to provide options. And then again, making it really obvious to your reader what you want the message to be with the ad. Not to pick on a local client. But this one, we've got quite a bit going on in the ad, and this tends to happen when a client really wants to include as much as possible in their space. But I really encourage you, again, if you have the opportunity to talk to the client in advance and convince them to kind of pare it down to one main message, we want to make sure that we are able to direct our readers where we want them and to follow in a way that makes sense. One of the unfortunate things about this ad is that we do have a great little deal over here that does catch our attention, but there's nowhere that tells me where this is located. And so in this case, I, as a reader, am in a situation where if I do want to go get a piercing, I have to go out of my way to go to the Instagram or the Facebook or check the website and things like that. And you do want to make sure that you're giving your reader everything up front that they would need from the ad, so they're not having to leave our publication to go get what they need. They have it all right in front of them. But again, this is one of those ads that was provided for us, so sometimes when the ads are provided, you let them roll as is. Now the ad rep might catch things like that in advance, and that's great when they do. But again, with those pre-provided ads, designers are often getting a say in that. So, but I do, again, like to include this just to make sure that we are looking for ads that really get to the point of what the main message is that we're looking for, and also gives the basic details that clients would want. Some other details that you would need is just making sure that your ad rep has provided the business's logo, or at least instructions on how to grab a high quality version. Sometimes you've got clients that are like, oh, you can just get it off my website. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it's low quality. So definitely look at that first things first if they're making you go grab it somewhere. If not, the ad rep should provide it on the trailer request card. And just make sure they've provided you all of the most up-to-date contact information for that client and their business. The reason I say this is because Google isn't always up to date. So while of course you as a designer could go grab the business's phone number if you need it, we did have an instance once a couple of years ago where a business had not updated their Google profile in a couple of years, and so the phone number was actually incorrect that the designer had plucked from it, not knowing. So definitely get those from your ad rep so we know it's as fresh as possible. With your advertising design, just a reminder that unlike magazine and newspaper where we are kind of restricted somewhat to our guides, you can get creative with your headline type in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to with other designs that you're working on week in and week out. So while you will have clients that have specific requests, definitely enjoy the freedom when it's there, but just know with this freedom comes responsibility. Don't go crazy with different fonts just because you can. Generally, having 2 families is perfect, but don't be afraid to just explore one font family for emphasis and hierarchy purposes. I would say Helvetica, Avenir Next, Minion Pro are all good readable standards for body text. But don't be afraid to have some fun with the headline and step outside the box. I will go ahead and tell you Avenir Next is one of my favorite families because I can use that for the headline, the body text, subhead, anything that I need to include, because there are so many options within that family. But when it comes to pairing and best practices, just make sure you're looking at this chart here. So if you already have selected a serif either for your headline or your body text, consider pairing it with a sans serif or a script, or a decorative font. It's not saying to pair it with all three of these at once, but pick one of these from below. Vice versa with sans serif, you can pair that with a serif or a script or a decorative. The only things to keep in mind is that you never want to pair a script and a decorative together as your two main fonts. Doesn't give you a lot of room for a good readable body text, and they tend to compete with each other because in essence they are both decorative. Some of these are my own personal pet peeves. I'll just go ahead and be honest about that, and some of them are ones that are legitimately made fun of in the graphic design world. When possible, do avoid the following fonts. So Impact is overused and has lost its impact as a consequence. Comic Sans is goofy and overused, so I don't want to see it unless you've got a client, again, who demands that you use Comic Sans. Chico's used to love Comic Sans and all their ads were in it. So again, sometimes you gotta go with what the customer wants, even if it goes against your own wishes. Papyrus, you're usually going to see that one with people that are like selling crystals or candles or like holistic stuff, but it's overused in that sense because it's got this kind of earthy, rugged vibe to it. There are other fonts out there with similar vibes, or that send a similar energy. Apple Chancery is one of the pre-installed scripts. There are other more natural scripts out there. This one is overused because it is one of the base ones on Adobe. Bradley Hand, Brush Script, Curls MT. I don't think you'll see these too much because they are Microsoft related, but I'm just pointing out these are ones that are also overused, and so that's why we want to stay away from them. All that being said, freedom aside, if you are tasked with creating an ad for a campus department, you are going to want to make sure that you are utilizing ECU's style guide above all else and sticking to it, because even if a client is running in our publication, which means they are not necessarily bound to the branding guides of ECU, let's say School of Communication is running an ad with us and we design it and it is not to ECU's branding guides, but they decide to use the ad that we created in another ECU publication down the line, it's going to get turned down by branding because ECU wants to keep a specific imagery among all of its departments and schools. So do make sure you're referencing this style guide before moving forward with an ECU ad. You've got the logos down here and rules about that, basic color palette of what to include, as well as some alternatives, and then the typefaces that they would want you to use down here and which instances you might use them. So you'll see my favorite, Avenir Next, has made the cut for ECU, but you also have the use of Adobe Garamond, Museo Slab, but again, it'll tell you exactly how to use it. These decorative use fonts, Celestia and Ovidia's script, are ones that they're also going to say, hey, maybe just use that in the headline, but not as a body text or anything like that. They've also got PowerPoint templates down here if you ever need those, but not necessarily relevant to what we're talking about today. But do make sure that you familiarize yourself with this before proceeding with a campus department ad. Okay. And that concludes today's session. I would say let me know if you have questions, but if you're watching this virtually, I may not be available to answer them, but certainly check in with your creative director or production manager if you have questions about ads, as well as setting up that communication with your advertising rep. And definitely have fun with advertising design. We don't always get the opportunity to do it because, again, people will send in their own ads. So when you do get the opportunity to test out advertising design, whether that is a house ad for Pirate Media One or a local client, definitely have some fun with it because you may only get to do, 1 or 3 a year.